On my far left is Amjad Khan. Amjad is a senior litigation associate at Latham & Watkins Law Firm based in Los Angeles. He is a postgraduate research fellow at Harvard Law School and National Director of Public Affairs for the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community USA. Amjad is a graduate of Claremont McKenna College and Harvard Law School, where he served as editor-in-chief of the Harvard Human Rights Law Journal.
Good morning. Hope you can all hear me well. I wanted to begin by thanking the Federalist Society for inviting me to this very important symposium and seminar, and honored to be here. I also wanted to congratulate Paul Marshall and Nina Shea on their new book, which I've had occasion to devour last night when I received it. It's quite the read. And it's quite extensive and exhaustive. In the ongoing debate about religious defamation, the global debate, perhaps little attention has been paid to how blasphemy laws in Muslim countries adversely impact Muslim communities. And that very important question has been answered quite well by both of them in this book, and I'm very pleased to read that. In fact, such blasphemy laws, I contend, are problematic and dangerous precisely because they bring harm to a wide range and diverse group of religions, be it Christianity, Hinduism, or Islam. So my task today is really to give you a brief overview and introduction to how the blasphemy laws in two Muslim countries, Pakistan and Indonesia, are suffocating the human rights of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, a group that has several million members in Pakistan and several 100,000 members in Indonesia. So before I do that, who are the Ahmadis? Who is the Ahmadiyya Muslim community? Well, Ahmadis belong to a contemporary messianic movement founded in 1889 by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, who was born in a small village of Qadian in India. The fundamental difference between the Ahmadiyya Muslim community and the Sunni Muslim majority concerns the identity of the Messiah, the reformer that the Prophet Muhammad predicted would appear after him, and that all Muslims in the world currently await. The Ahmadis believe that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad was that Messiah, and his chief aim and purpose was to revive Islam by ending religious wars, condemning bloodshed, and reinstituting morality, justice, and peace. And the community claims a worldwide membership of several million in over 195 countries, and the largest concentration of Ahmadis are in South Asia and West Africa. So that's just a brief overview of who the Ahmadis are, which is very important to understand as I make my way through this talk. Now, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community is arguably the most persecuted Muslim community in the world. The U.S. State Department, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, and dozens of international human rights organizations have documented the systematic persecution of the Ahmadis at the hands of governments and extremists. It's quite well chronicled. Now, let me turn first to Pakistan. There are an estimated 4 million Ahmadi Muslims living in Pakistan. There are varying estimates, but most of the estimates in aggregate say there's several million Ahmadis in Pakistan. Now, Ahmadis, and this is very important, profess to be Muslims, but their belief is irrelevant under the law. And that is because Pakistan is the only Islamic state in the world to define who is or is not a Muslim for purposes of its constitution. And this is in Article 260 of its constitution. And more importantly, the Second Amendment to Pakistan's constitution explicitly declares that the Ahmadis are non-Muslim by law. So the main reason why Ahmadis are severely persecuted in Pakistan is because they are legally stripped of their right to self-identify as Muslims. So now I want to turn briefly to the question of blasphemy in Pakistan. So since 1984, since the regime of General Zia-ul-Haq, Pakistan has used its criminal code to prohibit and punish blasphemy. And blasphemy in Pakistan broadly refers to any spoken or written representation that, quote-unquote, directly or indirectly outrages the religious sentiments of Muslims. And 5 of Pakistan's penal code provisions punish blasphemy. And these are collectively referred to as the anti-blasphemy laws. Now, over the course of 26 or 27 years, more than 1,000 people have been arrested under these laws. And these individuals were Muslims, be they Sunni, Shia, or Ahmadi, Christians, and Hindus. A little known fact is that the majority of arrests under these laws in Pakistan are actually of Muslims, not Ahmadis or Christians, but Muslims. And the crimes range from, for example, wearing an Islamic slogan on a t-shirt to planning to build a mosque or distributing Islamic literature in a public square or offering prayers in a mosque or putting Arabic script on a wedding invitation card or sending a text message that's perceived to be critical of Islam. These are all actual cases. The punishments for these crimes range from fines, indefinite detention, life imprisonment, or the death sentence. And although no one to date has been executed in Pakistan for blasphemy, at least 32 individuals have been killed by mobs after having been arrested for blasphemy. So Pakistan's anti-blasphemy laws continue in full force and effect today. They incite religious extremism and silence the opinions of both Muslim and non-Muslim minorities. And as I mentioned, this is well documented. The U.S. State Department's recent reports on Pakistan point out how, quote, authorities routinely use the anti-blasphemy laws to harass religious minorities and vulnerable Muslims and to settle personal scores or business rivalries. Amnesty International reports Pakistan's anti-blasphemy laws are, quote, a handy tool to silence debate and dissent. Human Rights Watch reports that, quote, Pakistan's continued use of its blasphemy laws against religious minorities is disgraceful and must be repealed. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom described the anti-blasphemy laws as, quote, restricting religious freedom and fostering vigilante violence. Now, I mentioned there are 5 anti-blasphemy laws in Pakistan. The most notorious of these laws is a 50-word penal code ordinance known as Section 295C. Now, there are several of you in the audience who are lawyers, and lawyers have a strange fascination for statutes, and so I thought I would actually read out the 50 words so that all of you can have an understanding of how broad this law really is. And this is the blasphemy law, applying to all religions in Pakistan. Quote, whoever by words, either spoken or written, or by visible representation, or by any imputation, innuendo, or insinuation, directly or indirectly, defiles the sacred name of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, shall be punished with death or imprisonment for life, and shall also be liable to fine. But based on this incredibly broad and vague language, Virtually anyone can register a blasphemy case against anyone else in Pakistan, and the accused can face capital punishment. Now, with respect to the Ahmadis, Pakistan's anti-blasphemy laws have criminalized their very existence. 2 of those 5 laws, I read one of them, 2 of those laws specifically by name target the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, and these are what are known as Martial Law Ordinance 20, which amended Pakistan's Penal Code and Press Publication Ordinances Section 298B and C. And for fear of being charged with, quote, and this is the language of these laws, indirectly or directly posing as a Muslim, Ahmadis cannot profess their faith verbally or in writing. Virtually any public act of worship, devotion, or propagation by an Ahmadi can be treated as a criminal offense punishable by death, a fine, life imprisonment. And the Supreme Court of Pakistan, in a decision in 1993, Zahiruddin versus State, upheld the constitutionality of Ordinance 20, which is a very significant fact. Now, Ahmadis account for about 40% of all the arrests under Pakistan's blasphemy laws. And the situation grows dire each passing year. In 2009, for example, there were 4 Ahmadi school teenagers in the Laya district who were formally charged with blasphemy for allegedly writing the name of Muhammad on the walls of a mosque's toilet. And the teenagers, the youngest was 14, remained behind bars without bail for 6 months, and they continue to face blasphemy charges even today. And according to the BBC, the charges they face are purely fabricated. And there are cases like this that are not uncommon in Pakistan. In prior years, elderly Ahmadi women, Ahmadi mothers, even Ahmadi babies have fallen victim to the anti-blasphemy laws. And the persecution of the Ahmadis in Pakistan goes beyond individual arrests. Under the guise of these laws, Pakistani governmental authorities have demolished, set on fire, forcibly occupied, sealed, or barred the construction of over 90 Ahmadi mosques. They have denied the cemetery burial of 41 Ahmadis and have exhumed, after burial, the bodies of 28 Ahmadis. In addition, Pakistan's security forces, which are in the news today, don't adequately protect Ahmadis from attacks by extreme groups who justify their behavior by invoking these laws. For example, on May 28, 2010, the community watched in horror as the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, the Pakistani Taliban, gunned down and massacred 86 Ahmadis in 2 mosques while they were offering Friday prayers. And this was the largest single attack on the Ahmadi community in its history. And in 2010 alone, 99 Ahmadis were killed and murdered, including these 86. What's significant about this incident is the police in Lahore knew of the operations that were taking place and did nothing to stop it, despite the fact that the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan had written a letter to them explicitly saying that such a threat was imminent. In the end, 86 people were dead. So before I get to Indonesia now, let me highlight 2 other issues that Ahmadis face that are really unique to Ahmadis and very tragic because they only affect the Ahmadis. And I mentioned the breadth of the law, and the Christian persecution in Pakistan is well documented. And the new book by Paul and Nina does a great job of chronicling that. But these 2 issues are unique to Ahmadis. The first issue concerns the right to vote in Pakistan. So in Pakistan, from 1978 to 2002, there was a separate electorate. What that meant was that non-Muslims, which included Christians and Hindus and Ahmadis, were put on a separate electoral roll, and they can vote for separate candidates, minority candidates for minority seats. and Muslims were on a completely different role. Now, this was a regime that was well criticized by the international community. So in 2002, President Musharraf passed an executive order, Executive Order 7, that eliminated that and said there will be a joint electorate. All Pakistani citizens can vote for any and all candidates as equal citizens. So this was heralded as a very positive step. But 4 months later, he passed Executive Order 15 that said, quote, "The status of Ahmadis remains unchanged." So in order for Ahmadis to vote, they must declare themselves to be non-Muslim, declare their founder to be an impostor, and add their names to a supplemental list that is completely separate and apart from all other citizens who are on the joint list. Well, not surprisingly, they are the only religious group that is effectively disenfranchised, and no Ahmadi would follow those preconditions and therefore have boycotted the elections. Very ironic, because Ahmadis are extremely literate, extremely well educated, and came out in large numbers when this joint electorate was reinstated. But by a stroke of a pen, 3 months later, President Musharraf effectively and to date disenfranchised the Ahmadi community. They cannot vote. And the second issue that's unique to Ahmadis is the Pakistani passport application form. So the government of Pakistan designates religious affiliation on your passport. Now, all Muslims in Pakistan, when they have to apply for a passport to travel or get their passport renewed, they have to fill out a form that says, "I declare that the Ahmadi Muslim community is non-Muslim and that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, their founder, is an imposter." So in other words, the government of Pakistan forces all Pakistani Muslims who seek passports, regardless of whatever reason they're applying for, to swear and declare under penalty of perjury that they are opposed to the Ahmadis. So this, in a nutshell, is the situation in Pakistan. Now, briefly in Indonesia. Now, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community in Indonesia is roughly 250,000 strong, and they were established in 1925. Now, on February 6th, earlier this year, more than 1,000 extremists of the Islamic Defenders Front, and many of them were brandishing machetes, spears, and sticks, they attacked a house of an Ahmadi Muslim leader in Chisisek in West Java, and 20 Ahmadis were inside the home. And they beat to death 3 Ahmadis. Now, 2 really salient facts about this. First, there were several dozen Indonesian police officers who watched. Second, the entire beating was captured on video by Human Rights Watch and went viral immediately on February 6th. And these 3 Ahmadis, one was 34. He was beaten and mutilated with a knife. He was survived by his pregnant wife. The second was 38. He survived by his wife and 4 children. And the third was 35. And he survived by his wife and 2 daughters. They're all very young. And scores of newspaper articles have brought attention to this. Newsweek, Wall Street Journal, New York Times. And they were roundly denounced, these attacks, by the U.S. State Department, the U.S. Ambassador to Indonesia, the U.S. Commission. But what this attack did is it sent shockwaves in a country that is perceived to be quite moderate. And it was an important moment, I contend, in Indonesia's history, because it brought to the forefront this discussion that had been sort of tabled for a long time, and that is about Indonesia's blasphemy law, which a lot of people are unfamiliar with. So briefly, in the interest of time, on January 27, 1965, President Sukarno enacted a blasphemy law. And that took legal effect in 1969, and that law makes it unlawful to, quote, intentionally in public communicate, counsel, or solicit public support for an interpretation of a religion or a form of religious activity that is similar to the interpretations or activities of an Indonesian religion, but deviates from the tenets of that religion. And what the blasphemy law does is it acknowledges only 6 religions in Indonesia, 6 approved religions: Islam, Protestant Christianity, Catholicism, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Confucianism. But it does not acknowledge the varying sects and strands within those faiths. And the blasphemy law establishes that the government will protect its official religions by punishing those who insult approved religions and those who attempt to dissuade others to adhere to unofficial religions. And there are civil and criminal penalties for these violations, and I won't go into the details. But Article 156A of the Criminal Code attaches a maximum penalty of 5 years imprisonment for intentionally criticizing or attempting to undermine the government's officially recognized religions. Now, why is this important? Well, in 1980, the MUI, the Ulama Council, the highest religious body in Indonesia, passed a fatwa declaring the Ahmadis to be not a legitimate form of Islam. And since that fatwa, there has been, and the MUI is funded by the Indonesian government, there has been an enormous crackdown on the Ahmadis. And this came to a head in 2008 when government ministers passed a joint decree that banned all activities of the Ahmadi community as deviant. And they did so to protect law and order. The result of that was that there were over 100 attacks on the Ahmadis in just 3 years, including the 3 that I mentioned earlier. And so my last few points on this are simply that the blasphemy law in Indonesia is now becoming intensely scrutinized, but the Constitutional Court in Indonesia upheld by a vote of 8-1 its constitutionality in 2010. So now we're at a stage where at least 6 provinces have banned the Ahmadi community, and we're nearing the time where Ahmadis would be banned outright, the way they have been banned in Pakistan. So in conclusion, these were just a thumbnail sketch, really, of the persecution of Ahmadis in Pakistan and Indonesia. They endure unconscionable persecution around the world. But my point is that the source of this persecution are extremists who would pervert Islam to nefarious ends. But the battle against these extremists in places like Pakistan or Indonesia cannot be won unless their governments reform or repeal the blasphemy laws that give ammunition to these extremists. It's simply not enough to apprehend and uproot extreme groups like the Pakistani Taliban. The U.S. has to push these countries to repeal these laws in order to dismantle the extremist apparatus that really endangers the world. And ultimately, this is the only way to empower the most moderate Muslim voices in the world. Thank you.